Who were the mysterious Magi? No Christmas nativity is complete without these mystic visitors from the East at Jesus' birth. But they are shrouded in legend, and if we separate the facts from fiction, their journey is even more baffling, with so many unanswered questions. How many Magi or wise men were there? 3 or more than 3? How old was Jesus when they visited? A baby or older? How did they know to identify the star with the Messiah? And why did they choose the gifts they did? We'll try to answer these and many more questions in this video. Church tradition claims there were 3 Magi. This is because they presented Jesus with 3 gifts, but that doesn't necessarily mean there were 3. Church tradition also has named the Magi Melchior, Gaspar, and Balthazar, but those names are conjecture as well. The Bible never refers to these men as kings, but rather calls them Magi. In the ancient Middle East, this term referred to a class of wise men, and possibly priests who were interpreters of dreams and signs. They were particularly skilled in astronomy and other sciences and mathematics. The word magic comes from this term, Magi. We are told the Magi came from the East. What does this mean? Well, nearly all of the ancient Middle East was east of Israel, where Jesus was born. Looking at this map of the 1st century, however, it is unlikely that they came from anywhere further east than the Zagros Mountains in Persia, which is in modern Iran. Both Babylon and Persia were due east of Israel. And Turkey went by the name the East, or Anatolia. All of these are possible locations. However, in my mind, Babylon and Persia are more likely. When Daniel the prophet and his 3 Hebrew friends were taken into exile by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, he encountered Magi in the king's royal court. Famously, these wise men were unable to help the king interpret his dream about a great statue of gold, silver, bronze, and iron. Daniel, however, with the help of God, was able to interpret it. As a reward, Daniel was made chief of the Magi in Babylon. This is our first clue as to the probable identity of the Magi. If Daniel was the chief of the Magi 550 years before Jesus' birth, perhaps he had as much influence on them as he did on the Israelites. Did Daniel share the books of the Old Testament with the Magi? I would have to imagine that he did. Daniel would certainly have desired as many as possible should know his God. If so, this would have included Isaiah's prophecy that told of a child who would be born and a son who would be given, one who would be God and worthy of worship. It would also include Balaam's prophecy in Numbers 24:17, which foretold a star coming out of Jacob. They would have also included Daniel's prophecy of the 70 weeks that foretold the exact year the Messiah would present himself to Israel, 27 AD. By assuming that the Messiah would be 30 years old or so when his ministry began, they could have backdated to an approximate date to travel to see this Messiah. This rather precise date may have caught you by surprise. If you want more details on the prophecy of the 70 weeks and how we know it was 27 AD when the Messiah presented himself, please pick up a copy of the book 70 times 7, Daniel's Mysterious Countdown and the Church's Heroic Future. You can find it on Amazon. So simply by using the Old Testament books available to them at the time, the Magi could have known that a baby would be born in Israel approximately in 3 BC or so, and that a star would announce him. However, this probably wouldn't have been enough for them to risk a multi-month journey across the desert. There must have been some other signal for them to travel to where the Messiah was born. One possibility is that Daniel wrote prophecies for the Magi that are not included in our Bible. Daniel wrote only one book found in the Old Testament. Might he have written perhaps hundreds of books for the Magi since he was their chief? Possibly, and maybe these books contained prophecies that were specifically for the Magi and their journey, telling them how to identify the star, when to leave, etc. Another possibility is that God sent the Magi a dream before they visited the Christ child. We know from the book of Matthew that God sent them a dream after their visit, warning them not to return to Herod. Why couldn't he have given them a dream beforehand? But whatever manner they learned about the specifics of when they were to leave on their journey, it was a journey of great faith across mountains and inhospitable deserts. If the Magi traveled from Babylon, it was approximately 900 miles. When Ezra the scribe made this trip as recorded in Ezra 7:9, it took him and his entourage 4 months to make the journey. If they came from Persia, it was even a longer journey. But there is no way men carrying expensive gifts would make this journey alone. It would be way too dangerous. We only know that there was more than one Magi, maybe 2, but probably as many as a dozen, and it is likely that they also traveled with a troop of soldiers for protection. The pictures of 3 men on camels is mostly myth, and they followed a star. So many theories have arisen about the star. Some claim it was the planet Jupiter that made some very interesting and striking conjunctions at that time. Others claim it might have been supernatural. There is really little known about this star. It's a mystery. Here is what we can know. The Magi told Herod, "We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." What does "in the east" mean? Stars rise above the eastern horizon, so this could mean, as many scholars surmise, that they saw it when it arose. The Magi also were from the east, so this phrase might simply mean they saw it when they were in their own country. What it probably doesn't mean, however, is that they followed yonder star, as the song tells us. They traveled west, so if the star was in the eastern sky, they weren't following it. Also, if they were referring to their own country when they said they had only seen the star there, that implies it didn't lead them on their journey, it only started them on their journey. If that bursts a couple Christmas traditions, I'm sorry. Later, in Matthew 2:9, the Magi are surprised when they see the star again. So this implies they weren't led by it on a nightly basis. Rather, it appeared at the beginning of their journey and then at the end of their journey. Also, the Magi didn't go to Bethlehem directly. If they were following the star, why would it lead them to Jerusalem and King Herod? It seems they knew the Messiah was born in Israel based on the sign of a star they saw back in their native land, but they didn't know where he would be born in Israel. That's why they went to Jerusalem first. King Herod the Great wasn't an Israelite. He was an Edomite, from the lineage of Esau. But the Roman Caesar appointed him king of the Jews. He was a paranoid individual. He used secret police to monitor the general populace, sought to prohibit protests, and had his opponents removed by force. He even had one of his wives and 3 of his sons killed, whom he imagined were plotting against him. Into this court intrigue came the Magi, asking, "Where is he who is born king of the Jews?" Imagine Herod's paranoia as these wise men, probably protected by armed guards, arrived from a rival country, asking where the new king was. Herod thought, of course, that he was the only king. So Herod took them and their report of a kingly star very seriously. He gladly had his Jewish scribes provide them with the prophetic birthplace of the Messiah, Bethlehem. Now this prophecy doesn't end just with the birth of Messiah in Bethlehem. No. First, it tells that Messiah will be eternal. He will be God. And the prophecy goes on to talk about how the Messiah will one day defeat a coming king, the Assyrian, who is the coming Antichrist. Now, if Herod was paranoid prior to hearing this prophecy, he must have been terrified, thinking about the ramifications for evil men. So Herod coyly asked the Magi when the star first appeared to ascertain the age of the Messiah. He wouldn't have asked this if he didn't believe in the star sign. Now the little town of Bethlehem was only 5 miles from Jerusalem, and the Magi traveled to see the child. What is almost unbelievable to me is that no one else from Jerusalem went with them. The Jewish elite, who had waited hundreds of years for their Messiah, didn't even bother to travel 5 miles to see if the rumor was true. Stop and think about how incredible that was. In fact, the biblical record states, when Herod the king heard this, that Jesus was born, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. The Jewish leaders were worried about the birth of the Messiah. This should tell us something about their spiritual condition, that they were more scared of Herod, an earthly king, than of God himself. The Magi, however, had come to worship. Those who believe the Magi were pagans should consider this closely. A pagan doesn't worship Jesus. Only a believer does. And what kind of faith does it take to travel 4 months across a desert based only on the sign of a star? Great faith. Truly great faith. The nativity scenes under many trees at Christmas include the wise men. But were they present at the birth of Jesus? Matthew specifically says they visited Jesus in a house, not a stable, and the Greek word used shows that Jesus was a toddler, not a baby. This seems entirely consistent with the age that Herod assumed Jesus was at the time of their visit, 2 years old or slightly younger. When they entered the house, the Bible says they saw Jesus and his mother. Where was Joseph? Likely he was at work. And then they presented their precious gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Gold was the most precious metal in the ancient world and was symbolic of Jesus' role as king, King of Kings. Frankincense was a resin made from tree sap, and it was burned in sacrifices of praise in the temple, and was symbolic of Jesus' role as priest, the only intercessor between God and man. Myrrh is also a resin and was used to embalm bodies. It was symbolic of Jesus' role as the sacrificial Lamb of God. Now, how did the Magi know to bring these absolutely appropriate gifts? An interesting tradition in the Middle East is that the prophet Daniel provided the gifts for the Magi to give to the Messiah. Now, Daniel lived 550 years prior to Jesus' birth. But at that time, he was the second highest official in Babylon. He was a wealthy man, and yet Nebuchadnezzar had made him a eunuch, so he had no offspring to leave his fortune to. According to this tradition, Daniel put his fortune away to give to the Messiah. And it was he who chose the symbolic gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Of course, this is only a tradition. Finally, the most tragic aspect of the account of the Magi is what happened to the babies of the region around Bethlehem. When the Magi didn't return to Herod after they were warned in a dream, the paranoid king ordered all male babies under the age of 2 to be murdered. He figured if he killed all the male babies, he would kill the Messiah. Fortunately, an angel warned Joseph also, and he and Mary escaped with Jesus to Egypt. Most likely, they utilized the gifts they received to finance the trip. God provides all that we need. However, the poor babies around Bethlehem were not as lucky. Matthew quotes the prophet Jeremiah, a voice it heard in Ramah, mourning and great weeping, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted, because they are no more. Jeremiah 31:15. Ramah was 5 miles north of Jerusalem, Bethlehem 5 miles south. Did Herod slaughter over that entire district? Possibly. If so, it was truly a horrific event. What a contrast that reality was from the beautiful nativity figures beneath so many Christmas trees today. So, who were the mysterious Magi? No matter what was fact and what is fiction, they were worshipers, as we all should be. And if you'd like to learn more about other mysterious prophecies, links to 2 other videos are on this page. Also, if you'd like to learn more about Bible topics, subscribe to our channel by clicking the small red button in the lower right corner. Until next time, this is Nelson for the Gospel in the End Times. Merry Christmas.